All right, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. We're diving into a text today called The Practice of Self-Mastery, Part 1. And, for our listeners, I think this is going to be really up your alley because it's about getting to those big ideas, the core of something, without getting bogged down. And what this text is really getting at is this idea of achieving a real sense of freedom, spiritual, mental, even on like an existential level, by really looking inwards instead of always looking for validation or guidance from outside sources.
Absolutely. The thing that hits you right off the bat is how this source frames self-mastery as not just some fluffy concept, it's the foundation for genuine enlightenment. And it goes even further, calling it a praxis, meaning it's not just an idea, it's something you have to actively cultivate. So it's about continuous work on your intellectual, your emotional, even like your energetic abilities. It's about building that internal compass.
Okay, so let's unpack this idea that self-mastery is the cornerstone of authentic enlightenment. Because the text really makes a point of setting it apart from things like, faith-based systems or needing that external validation. What's the argument there? Why is this internal cultivation so essential for genuine understanding?
Well, think about it this way. Knowledge from external sources is kind of like borrowing a tool. It's useful sometimes, but you don't really understand how it works on a deeper level. Self-mastery, though, is like forging your own end holes. And that process, that hands-on creation, leads to a way deeper, more integrated understanding of reality because it's built from your own effort and insights.
So it's less about being handed the answers and more about learning to find them yourself, right? And you mentioned it being a continuous refinement. How does that active work, that practice, lead to those aha moments, that deeper insight?
Well, if we zoom out a little, think about how much of what we think we know about ourselves in the world is just stuff we've absorbed from our surroundings, right? And this source is saying that self-mastery is about actively questioning and refining those inherited frameworks. So by constantly working on your intellectual and emotional capabilities, you can actually start to see past those preset limitations. And that's where the genuine insights come from your own analysis and experience, not just from taking things at face value. It's almost like we're born into a pre-programmed operating system, and self-mastery is about learning to access the source code and actually customizing it.
This is where it gets really interesting because the text then goes on to talk about how society itself can actually shape us in ways that can hinder that self-mastery. It talks about societal constructs like cultural norms, education systems, even political ideologies acting as constraints. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, definitely. The argument here is that these societal structures, while they might have their purpose, can also kind of inadvertently foster a reliance on external authorities. So they set up these norms for like what's acceptable, what's valuable, even how we should think and feel. And this can make us constantly look outward for approval and validation, which prevents us from developing our own internal compass. So recognizing those influences is key, so you can consciously choose which ones resonate with you, rather than being unconsciously driven by them. It's like societal patterns often guide humanity away from themselves, always looking beyond for solutions.
Right, so it's about shifting from being shaped by your environment to actively shaping your response to it. The source mentions this term, autonomous cognitive sovereignty. Sounds like taking back control of your own mind. How do we even begin to do that?
Well, and this raises a big question, which is, where do our beliefs even come from? Because a lot of them are so ingrained, we don't even realize they might not actually be our own. And according to this text, reclaiming that cognitive sovereignty starts with seriously questioning those beliefs. Like, why do I believe this thing? Where did this idea come from? Is it really serving me? It's about curating your own intellectual framework rather than passively accepting what you've been given.
And that ties right into this idea of moving away from external validation.
Yeah.
And the source suggests that this constant need for approval often stems from this thing it calls conditioned self-doubt.
Yeah.
How does self-mastery help us break free from that cycle?
Well, what's really key here is that by developing a really strong sense of self-worth and self-trust through that internal discipline, the need for external approval just naturally diminishes, you see. When you've got that solid internal foundation, your sense of value isn't dependent on other people's opinions anymore. So in this context, self-mastery is about building that unshakable internal validation. And doesn't mean you reject help from people when you need it, but it does mean you're not constantly relying on outside opinions to define your worth or your direction. You learn how to catch your own fish, so to speak.
I like that analogy. It makes a lot of sense. And the text also talks about this idea of building personal codes of conduct that are independent of societal mandates. That sounds like a pretty profound level of self-determination. How do you even begin to do that? It's like rewriting the rule book of your own life.
Exactly. It's a demanding process. It requires real, honest self-examination. And it's not about, rejecting all societal norms outright. It's about consciously evaluating them. Like, are these rules that I'm following really aligned with my core values, with my understanding of a meaningful existence? Self-mastery, in this sense, involves the courage to actually distinguish between what you've been told is right and what you genuinely believe to be right through your own reasoning and reflection.
And the source touches on a kind of unsettling idea, which is that a lot of those societal imperatives might actually be designed to enforce docility rather than encourage real growth. What are the implications of that for a pursuit of self-mastery?
Well, if we tie this back to that whole idea of societal conditioning, the text is kind of hinting that systems often benefit from conformity and a lack of critical thinking. Self-mastery, by its very nature, encourages us to question, to think critically, to pursue individual growth. So becoming aware of these potential hidden social mechanisms that are subtly promoting conformity, that's a crucial step in breaking free and really fostering your own autonomous philosophical development.
So it's about becoming aware of those subtle currents that might be influencing us without us even realizing it, right? Now, the final section we're going to look at is called the epistemology of the self, which sounds like a pretty deep dive into the nature of understanding ourselves. What's the core idea here in terms of self-mastery?
Well, this section really emphasizes that true self-awareness goes way beyond just knowing, your name and your basic characteristics. It's about an unrelenting analysis, that's what the text calls it, of your deepest motivations, your ingrained behavioral patterns, even those subconscious imprints that might be driving you without you even realizing it. It's about understanding the core architecture of your being.
And this leads to the concept of self-governance, where our thoughts and emotions and actions become aligned with what the source calls our undistorted expression of existential truth.
Oh.
That sounds like the ultimate form of inner harmony.
It is. And it's not about suppressing emotions or forcing yourself into some rigid mold. It's about achieving a genuine inner coherence where your internal world and your outward actions are resonating with your deepest understanding of yourself and your place in the world. It's about living authentically from that core. Think about that old story of the snake and the shaman in the cave. The snake, representing those primal instincts, those subconscious drives, it often operates in the darkness of the cave, our unawareness. The shaman, through deep introspection and self-knowledge, learns to understand the snake's movements, not to eliminate it, but to integrate its energy with that conscious awareness, and that brings harmony to the entire being. That's really the essence of this unrelenting analysis of the self.
The source also makes a point of saying that commanding one's environment through self-mastery is about achieving that internal equilibrium, not about wielding external power over things. Can you break down that distinction?
Sure. I think what's really important here is that shift in focus. So instead of trying to control the external world, the people, the circumstances, self-mastery emphasizes cultivating that inner stability. And when you have that equilibrium internally, you're way better equipped to navigate the external world effectively, not through force or manipulation, but through your own resilience and clarity and self-awareness. It's about mastering your own reactions, not mastering everything around you. And that internal equilibrium becomes your real point of power.
And a foundational part of that, according to the text, is cultivating things like personal well-being, self-respect, and autonomous emotional regulation. Why are those seen as so fundamental?
Well, if we circle back to that idea of societal conditioning we talked about earlier, a lot of people seek external validation because they haven't developed these internal resources. And self-mastery flips that script completely. It says that true fulfillment and that ability to really navigate life comes from nurturing those inner faculties first. So when you have self-respect, when you can regulate your emotions on your own, you become way less reliant on external factors for your sense of worth and stability. You're basically learning to find your own light in the cave instead of always searching for an external flame.
And the source emphasizes that self-mastery is an empirical and iterative process, which sets it apart from belief systems based on faith. What does that mean practically for someone who's actually trying to cultivate self-mastery?
It's a key difference. Because self-mastery isn't about blind faith. It's about direct experience and constantly refining your approach. So it's about experimenting with different ways of understanding yourself, seeing how those experiments play out within your own being, and constantly adjusting and evolving based on that internal feedback. It's an ongoing journey driven by your own internal compass, rather than just following a fixed set of external rules or doctrines.
Constantly being tested and refined through experience and self-reflection. The text finishes by saying that the expansion of self-mastery ultimately leads to this dynamic understanding of existence, where we become, and I'm quoting here, autonomous architects of our reality, rejecting that passive reliance on external forces and affirming our own agency. That's a powerful statement.
It really gets to the heart of the whole thing, because by taking ownership of our inner world, by understanding and dismantling the impact of that external conditioning, and by continuously working towards that deeper self-awareness and self-governance, that's how we transition from being passive recipients of reality to active creators of our own experience. It's about recognizing and embracing the power we have to shape our lives from the inside out.
So bring it all back together. This deep dive into the practice of self-mastery has really highlighted this essential idea of achieving that internal sovereignty. It's about understanding the societal forces that shape us, often leading us to look outside ourselves for solutions and validation. Self-mastery, as is presented here, is about turning that focus inward, developing a deep awareness of the self, and building that essential inner strength and clarity. And it's not about isolating ourselves or refusing help, but about building the capacity to navigate life with our own internal compass, becoming our own shaman in that cave of self-discovery.
Absolutely. It's about cultivating that inner resilience and self-understanding so you're not always looking outside yourself for the answers. It's about mastering your own inner landscape so you can navigate the external world with true autonomy.
That's a great point to wrap up on. And for you, the listener, as you reflect on this deep dive into self-mastery, think about this. How might these ideas encourage you to reevaluate where you're currently looking for solutions and validation in your OWN life? Are there areas where cultivating that inner self-reliance could lead to a more profound sense of autonomy, of understanding, and ultimately a more fulfilling existence? It's definitely a journey worth considering.